So during the final few years of high school, I realized that my study habits were in a pretty bad shape. This was a problem because in a few months I was about to head to university to study astrophysics, which is a notoriously difficult subject. So I spent my time trying to turn this around and studying the habits of the most successful students, both past and present, to try and understand what makes them tick. I looked at their daily schedule, their habits, their mindsets, their attitude towards studying. And by implementing these techniques, I managed to turn around my studies from starting at a place of burnout to graduating with a first-class honours degree, the equivalent of a 4.0 GPA. Now, I've compressed what I learned about these highly productive, high-performance students into 7 habits which, if implemented correctly, can absolutely transform your studies. And in this video, we're going to look at each habit one by one with actionable steps on how you can implement these to enable you to become a high-performance student as well. Now, if there's one habit I want you to take away from this video, it's this one, which is do not fall behind. At the start of a new semester, deadlines and exams and assignments can seem far away, and it seems like you've got all the time in the world to focus on those at a later date. And so a lot of people fall into the mistake of spending that time partying and socializing and exercising and essentially anything other than studying. But before you know it, those deadlines will sneak up on you. And what happens when you're not prepared is you end up going into a state of panic and cramming, and it just leads to a really high stress situation where you're just not able to perform at the level of high performance students. So what do we want to do to ensure that we're maximizing our output while also allowing time for spending time with friends or on hobbies? Well, a gradual ramp in the amount of work you do is probably the optimal way of doing this, and that starts right at the beginning of the semester. Let's take a look at 2 students and how they approach work. Student 1 takes a very relaxed approach to work and puts off work until it's absolutely necessary, whereas student 2 decides that he's going to stay on top of the work right from the start of the semester. During the first 2 weeks of the semester, there's no assignment, so student 1's pretty happy, and he's not doing much work, so his stress is really low. Student 2 decides that he's still going to go to parties, still going to socialize, still going to keep up on top of his hobbies, but he's also going to spend some time studying. Now, his stress level's pretty low, but you know, a little bit more than student 1. But what happens when we get to sort of week 3 and 4 when the assignments start to kick in? Soon, student 1 realizes that he's actually way behind where he needs to be, and so he starts pulling late-nighters and all-nighters, and the cortisol level increases, stress increases, and when that happens, it's almost impossible to perform at a level that allows you to actually output good quality work. Meanwhile, student 2 has been ramping up his work from the very beginning, so he's already on top of the lecture content and now only has to apply that to the assignment. So if you want to be a successful, high-performing student, the first thing, and probably the most important thing you should be doing, is not falling behind, staying on top of the work, even if it seems like you've got all the time in the world. Now, as I mentioned in the first habit, university offers students a huge amount of free time, and it's very unlikely that at any point in your life previously you'd have had as much free time, or at least freedom over your time. Now, it's crucial that this free time is spent productively. You may be thinking that this means spending the free time studying all the time to keep on top of the work. Well, yes, up to an extent. It's important to keep on top of the work, as we've already discussed, but productively doesn't necessarily refer solely to studying. There's actually far more to your time at university than studying, and studying more doesn't necessarily equate to being more productive. Now, Cal Newport actually mentions this in his book Slow Productivity, where he says, "To work without change would have seemed unusual to most of our ancestors. Seasonality was deeply integrated into the human experience." Now, what this actually means is that time spent away from your work can actually make you more productive when you return to it. And by implementing variation into your workload, you're able to increase your productivity, maximize your performance, and above all, increase your efficiency in terms of spending less time to perform higher quality work. So how can you spend your free time wisely? Well, this may include spending time with friends, socializing, spending time on hobbies, or reading books. It could be exercising. There's an infinite number of ways that you could spend your time productively. The important thing is that you are introducing variation into your work life, and the most productive students implement that as a part of their daily routine. They have social activities, they have hobbies, and they spend time with friends outside of their studies. The third habit is to surround yourself with other highly productive students. Now, I've seen a lot of criticism online for mantras like you are the average of the 5 people you spend most time with, but For me, and from my experience, this is completely true. I mean, imagine your closest friends or the people you spend most time with at university are all lazy and low performance, with no discipline and are completely unambitious. That is going to have some influence on your mindset and your attitudes towards studying. If, by contrast, you surround yourself with people who are performing well at university, who study hard and make the necessary sacrifices to be able to study at a high level, well, then you're going to start picking up those habits. So by mingling with the right group of people, you're essentially enabling yourself to form the habits of that group of people. It's perfectly okay to have friends who aren't as disciplined or who aren't as ambitious as you, but it's important to recognize the influence that that person or those people may be having on you. At university, I've seen that there's, largely speaking, two stereotypical groups of people. You've got the really high achieving students with great grades but really poor social life, and then you've got the opposite, people with a great social life who go out partying all the time but whose academic record is really, really bad. And it's easy to think that those are the only two options, but there is an island right in the middle of those two groups of people where there are people who are high performance, high achieving, who have a great social life, and who don't really have to sacrifice much of either. This is the exact spot that you want to be. You want to surround yourself with sociable people who study hard, and you can find these people all over university. You can find them in societies and clubs and hobbies. But if you can't find them, then just make your own. The important thing is you're surrounding yourself with people who you want to be like. And in this case, you want to surround yourself with high performance students with a healthy work-life balance. The fourth habit, I think, is the one that really separates the highest performance students from the average student, which is to be proactive. Most students are doing pretty much the same thing, which is completing assignments, preparing for exams, studying, or going to lectures. And this is absolutely necessary for any high-performance student. But the highest performance students spend maybe 5 or 10% of their time proactively doing that extra bit of work that the other students are not doing. And it can often only be this 5% of time that really separates most students from the highest achieving. So how can you spend your time proactively? The great thing about proactive activities is they oftentimes have huge returns on effort and time investments. Now, this is pretty easy to visualize. I mean, imagine you're going into a new semester and you're starting to struggle with some of the topics and work, so you decide to start grinding through some of the practice problems and textbooks and online resources to try and up this understanding. And no matter what you do, you seem to be stuck at this level. So it may seem that the only way out of this is just to keep digging, keep grinding through that work. Well, that's clearly one way to do it, but it's obviously not the most optimized way. What if instead you decided to go to office hours that most lecturers will hold at university? The great thing about these is that many students don't take advantage of them, and so when you go to these office hours, you're oftentimes having one-on-one sessions with the lecturer in the exact module that you're struggling with, and they can give you personalized advice on how you can move forward with your understanding. This small investment of maybe an hour or two going to these office hours can massively outweigh all of that time spent grinding through practice problems and textbooks and lecture notes and resources online. And there's plenty of other proactive activities that you can do as well. For example, pre-reading lecture notes before the lecture. What this means is that you already have an understanding of what's about to be included in the lecture, and you can much better absorb the information that's talked about in the lecture. The notes and the PowerPoints for a lecture are going to be the same before, during, and after the lecture, so that content is almost pointless to actually write down during the lecture. What's important during a lecture is to listen to what the lecturer is saying, because they oftentimes reference little bits of additional context for a topic or additional resources that you can use, which if you're busy writing down what's on the PowerPoint, you can easily miss. Another proactive activity is planning your time effectively right from the start of a semester, so you know exactly when you're going to start ramping up your workload and you know exactly when the assignments are going to be. The common feature of all of these suggestions is that they rely on you taking the initiative to get ahead of the game early on. Proactivity can actually outweigh productivity if it's implemented correctly. The fifth habit takes some inspiration from Cal Newport's deep work, which is that we should study deeply. Now, studying deeply essentially means we want to cultivate an environment and habits that allow us to study in a state of flow. Now, I'm sure you've experienced this state of flow at some point in your life already. It's that feeling when time seems to just whiz by as you're focused deeply on one task. The problem is that studying in a deep and focused fashion is becoming a harder and harder skill to do, especially given that we live in a world of complete and utter distraction. I mean, at any given moment, you could pick up your phone and be completely consumed by an endless amount of distracting content. And the unfortunate thing is, no matter how enjoyable it is to watch content on Instagram or YouTube Shorts or TikTok, they are the complete enemy of focused work. As Cal Newport says in Deep Work, to learn hard things quickly, you must focus intensely, without distraction. If you instead remain one of the many for whom depth is uncomfortable and distraction ubiquitous, you shouldn't expect these systems and skills to come easily to you. Now, largely speaking, the more extreme and ruthless you are in removing distractions from your studies, the better you are. Start by removing all notifications from your phone that aren't completely necessary. Anything from Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Reddit, Discord, anything that you don't absolutely need right there in an emergency should be gone. A better option, which is what I used to do, is to remove social media completely from your phone. The only two apps that I used to regularly use on my phone used to be WhatsApp and phone calls. That was it. Everything else I used to do on my laptop, and I could use apps like Cold Turkey to block social media sites during study time. But the best and most extreme way of removing distractions is to just remove digital devices completely. Now, I talk about this in more detail in my article on how to study effectively, which I will link in the description. If you remove your phone from where you're studying, remove your laptop and just study with pen and paper, you are much more likely to be able to focus over a long period of time when you build that habit of being in a steady state. Now, of course, there's going to be times where you need your phone for an emergency, but in that case, there are plenty of ways of working around this if you are really dedicated. So, for example, you could buy a cheap $20, £20 flip phone to use for emergencies only, where you cannot even install any apps for distraction. In the cases where you do need your laptop, that's absolutely fine as well, but you can install apps like Cold Turkey and you can set hard limits on when you want to block social media and distracting websites. And it's only when you set these ruthless limits on distractions that you can really take control of your studies and perform to the highest level. The sixth habit is to learn how to study properly. Studying isn't complicated, but it is hard. And it's the very fact that it's a hard thing to do which makes it valuable. If studying was easy, then it wouldn't have any value and everybody would do it. It's because some people can study and others can't study that jobs and employers and society generally values degrees and values the high grade degrees. But there is something wrong with that statement, which is that some people can't study and some people can study, because everybody can learn how to study. It's just about knowing how. So it becomes a very important skill to figure out how to study effectively. Now, you can do this by implementing different techniques that I've talked about in this video and some of my other videos. Now, a few important pointers to remember while figuring out how to study. First is time management. No matter how you decide you want to study, time management is absolutely crucial. Now, personally, I like to use time blocking, which is to set dedicated times throughout the day for study and for other activities, and you can meticulously plan exactly when you're doing any given task or activity. To do this, start by creating a blank template for a weekly calendar. You can then start putting in the essential activities and commitments like lectures or meeting friends, and then start working around this about exactly when you're going to study. So this could be you have a lecture at 9 until 11 in the morning, and then you're going to spend 11 until 3 p.m. studying, and then you take a break at 3 p.m. to get some food, and then maybe you go from 4 until 7 p.m. doing another study session. Now, when you're doing these study sessions, it's important to make clear and measurable goals for that session. So this might be that you go and rewatch a given lecture and you make notes on that lecture for the next 2.5 hours. Or it might be that in the next hour you do 5 practice questions. Setting these goals to measure your performance and your output is critical to ensuring that you are staying on top of the work as you'd expect. And it's also important, as I've already mentioned in the deep study habit, to cultivate a healthy working environment. So removing distractions and to set up your study environment that promotes a deep and focused work style. There seems to be a massive rise in students turning to tools like Anki and Notion and Rome Research and Todoist, but I think something that's often overlooked that's quite important around is just to try and remove the complication from productivity workflows and start to pick tools that work around your productivity system rather than trying to mold your workflow to one of these apps and tools. Because when you do that, it's oftentimes at the detriment of your productivity. So spend some time figuring out how you work best and start to build your productivity workflow around that. The seventh and final habit that I want to talk about is to embrace ignorance and to avoid arrogance. As a student entering university, it can oftentimes be easy to look at your fellow course mates and think of them as competition, and the final grades being the prize of that competition. But this is a poor mindset to have when entering a university, because it's oftentimes these course mates who will become your friends and will help you along in your journey. Now, in this pursuit of competition that a lot of people have when they enter university is this idea that you need to know more than everyone else before you enter to get a head start in the game. But this is actually really counterproductive. Now let's look at why that is by, again, going back to two students. The first student enters university with a more advanced understanding of some of the topics that are about to be taught. Now the issue with this is that he comes with the attitude that he doesn't need to learn as much as the other students because he already understands it, and his learning progression looks very linear. The second student comes in with a pretty standard understanding of the topics that are about to be taught, just the level that you need to get into university in the first place, but is far more open to engaging with lectures and lecturers and to pay attention and really take on board the information that's being taught. Now his learning progression looks much more like an exponential curve, and soon during the degree he has overtaken student 1. Now we want to look like student 2 in that we are really engaging in the lectures. We're embracing the fact that we started university not knowing much about these topics, but are open to embracing this ignorance and to try and improve our knowledge on the topic. So this is a very simple one. Just embrace the fact that you don't know too much at the start. Engage with lecturers, engage with lecturers, and engage with your fellow course mates. So those were the 7 habits that allowed me to transform my studies from underperforming to achieving the highest grade at a 4.0 GPA. I hope you're able to take some influence from this and apply it to your own studies, and hopefully this video will allow you to transform your studies, become a high-performing student, and achieve those highest grades. If you want to learn more about these habits and pick up an additional few, then look in the description because I'll leave a link to the article that I've written that covers these in more detail. But I hope you found this video useful, and I will see you in the next one.